The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. Railey Molinario discusses with us how, by utilising relationship intelligence, we are able to master our emotions and empower ourselves.
Absolutely. So we first have to change our mindset. Again, we're very ignorant when it comes to creating successful relationships. So there's a lot of myths out there, and I'm here to try to bust some of those myths. And one of them is that when you're in a relationship, especially if you're married, the sex goes out of the window after a certain period of time. The relationship gets very repetitive and it gets boring. You get comfortable and this is just how it's going to be. And you become more like roommates or friends, and there's nothing you can really do about it. It's just what happens. Well, it happens because we don't have the tools and techniques, but it doesn't mean it has to happen. So when intimacy goes out of the window, we have to ask ourselves, is this a problem or is this an opportunity? So if we see it as an opportunity, we can create something totally different. We can create something fresh. It's like we have a blank slate and we can start over. So
The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. The Healing Through Love podcast with host Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson would love to acknowledge Global Glamping Charities Incorporated for generously supporting this podcast. Global Glamping Charities, solving homelessness in all of its forms. Reach out to them at globalglamping.org.
Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com. Healing Through Love is a social enterprise whose vision is to shift the awareness of domestic and family violence within the community and to support victims' survivors. Our mission is to provide family and domestic violence survivors with a soft place to land by offering advice and services available to them and to their families. We interview experts and survivors who share their personal stories and offer advice to those who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. And on an annual basis, we hold free Pamper Day events for victims, survivors, where businesses come together. They volunteer their time and their resources for the day to give our survivors a much needed day of indulgence. I want to thank our sponsors, Global Glamping Charities, for their valued support. Their primary purpose is to solve homelessness in all of its forms. And this includes people facing the real potential of economic homelessness from the gap between real wages and the cost of living, and those affected by natural disasters and women that are fleeing domestic and family violence. To find out more about Global Glamping Charities, you can find them at globalglamping.org. Today, my guest is Railey Molinario, and we're going to be discussing how to overcome trauma by mastering relationship intelligence. Welcome, Railey, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this platform, absolutely obsessed with what you do. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much for the kind words. Tell me a little bit about what relationship intelligence is.
Yes. So relationship intelligence is the ability to navigate our relationships successfully. We're talking about the relationship that we have with ourselves and the relationships that we have with other people, our partners, our children, our community, our coworkers, and really being able to navigate the ups and downs, the emotions, the reactions, so that we can live the best life we can possibly live.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think we could all use a bit of relationship intelligence. Now, you are an expert love educator and relationship coach, and you like to empower people to create lives that they love by teaching them relationship intelligence. And your signature program, the Power Couple PhD, teaches couples a scientifically backed formula for creating happy and healthy relationships. So can you tell me a little bit about what that course involves?
Yes. So we struggle a lot in our relationships, and mostly in the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with our partner, because these are the closest relationships we will ever have. And so a lot of times when we're struggling, we think that it's the other person, they're not the right person for us, or that person is maybe a bad person. But most of the time, what we're seeing is that it's not that two people are bad people or they enjoy suffering. It's that they don't have the education that they need to have successful relationships. They don't have the tools and techniques to thrive. When we're growing up, a lot of times our parents don't teach us the formula, school doesn't teach us the formula. And so we sort of rely on our friends and our family sort of telling us what they've done, but oftentimes they're suffering just as much as we are. So then, we have the influence of TV and movies, which are horrible examples of successful relationships. They're more about the theatrics and entertainment. So really, a lot of us are out here just not having any clue as to what is the foundation for a successful relationship. And so that's where the Power Couple PhD comes in. It gives them the complete formula of how to create a successful relationship. It's kind of like going back to school and getting that education in love.
Mm. And so what would be involved in undertaking this program? Because it sounds like it's really great. I mean, my children thought that after watching the Brady Bunch that that all mothers should be like Mrs. Brady, and I was far from Mrs. Brady. I did all the other things except do the cooking and make cookies and all that sort of stuff because it just wasn't in my I don't know, it just didn't feel comfortable for me to do that. But
Absolutely.
in relationships with your spouse or your other significant other, how can we make those better? What strategies can we use? Because not all of us feel that, that we are in love with ourselves, which I know, you've got to love yourself before others can love you. But what strategies can we take, I guess, to make a successful relationship?
Absolutely. So when we are in a relationship, we have to understand that there are really 3 steps to creating a thriving relationship. And it seems so simple, but it actually is. We say that relationships are hard, that marriage is difficult, you have to muster through it, and it's going to be full of a lot of fights and disagreements. But actually, relationships are more simple than we realize. So when we're talking about creating a thriving relationships, the 3 steps are: number 1, to create a common vision. You and that person have to have the same goals, values, expectations for the relationship so that you have a really clear foundation of who you are and where it is that you're going. Like you said, you weren't into the cooking and the cleaning, which a lot of people would say they're into or they're not into, and that's perfectly fine. So when we think about how big the world is and how much freedom we have, we really have to say, okay, freedom is an amazing thing, but we have to know how to manage it, how to navigate it, how to communicate. So right now we're having this big pull. I try to simplify it by saying we have the traditionalists and we have the progressives. And most of us are sort of in between, but just for argument's sake, we're going to keep it simple. So the traditionalists, I say, are, the ones who want the woman in the house cooking and cleaning, and the husband goes out and they have, 2.5 kids and they live in a house with a white picket fence. And that is perfectly fine. If that is what you subscribe to and that is what makes you happy, there is no right or wrong way to live your life. Then you have the people that I label sort of as progressive, who say none of those things matter. Gender roles don't matter. We share or we dictate who's going to do what based on skill sets. And that is also perfectly fine. Whatever you choose to have in your life, whatever life you choose to create for yourself, that is not an issue. What we have to do is make sure that the person that we are living that life with agrees with us. So if you have expectations that the woman is going to do the cooking and the cleaning, then you have to make sure to communicate that and make sure that that woman you're with also subscribes to those values. What we see a lot of times is people get into relationships based on love. Love is simply a sense of affection. It's a sense of deep affection for someone. It's an emotion. It's not enough glue to actually keep a relationship together. Compatibility is really the core source of successful relationships. So when you fall in love with someone and all those butterflies are happening, perfect. Now let's see if we're actually compatible and can we create a relationship out of this love. So we really have to say, what are our values? What are our expectations? What are the goals and aspirations for us as a couple? That's really step one. Step two is to master relationship intelligence. We are supposedly going to spend the rest of our lives together. Things are going to happen. People lose jobs. You have trouble with infertility. You have people who lose their lives and houses that are lost. That's just called life. And so how do we navigate these things with our partner? Do we have effective communication? Do we have a problem-solving technique? Do we understand what it means to understand, to show compromise, to show negotiation, to be able to show compassion and support for our partner? What do those words mean, and how do we practically implement them in our relationship? So that's sort of the idea of relationship intelligence. And then step three is that you cultivate joy. Joy is all the stuff that we want. That's the reason we get into the relationship. It's the quality time, the intimacy, the sex, the laughter, the play, all of those things. And so what a lot of people do is they get into a relationship, they fall in love, and then they want to go straight to the joy. It's not going to work. We have to build the foundation step by step. So step one is to have a common vision. Step two, master relationship intelligence. And step three, all of the joy will come.
Yeah, I think when I've been married to my husband for 31 years, and when we first started, he came from a very old-fashioned background where the wife just did as she was told, and brought the money home, put it on the table, and the man would deal with it. And I said, no, that's not happening. I go and earn the money, we'll share. So there were quite a few disagreements about money in the very beginning because we hadn't really discussed it before we got married. So that was, one sort of bad thing that we started off with. And so I can understand, if you don't set those boundaries straight away, and as you said before, you've got to work out what the roles are in the relationship. Otherwise it's not going to work. So I do the work now, and my husband does the house things because I don't like doing the cleaning and the washing and the ironing. So he does all of those things and I do the work, and we're really happy with that arrangement now. So it took us a long time to get to that compromise, but yeah, I'm really spoiled. Because my dinner's always cooked, and my clothes are washed and put away, and I don't need to worry about it. And I love life. I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely. And this is the thing, relationship intelligence works for any relationship dynamic. Whether, you're a certain religion, or you're a certain age, or you're a certain race, or you have, traditional values, progressive values, all of those things are completely irrelevant when we're talking about the success of relationships. A lot of people ask me, what is the right thing to do? Or what am I supposed to do? And it's difficult because a lot of times when we're fighting in relationships, we're fighting about what is right or wrong. And in most of those cases, neither one of you is right and neither one of you is wrong. It's just that you have two different opinions. So how do we navigate those different opinions? How do we make sure that we are both seen and we're both heard, and we respect both people's position and both people's, perspective? When we get into a relationship, we often think that the person that we're with is just like us. Well, it's impossible, right? No matter how much you have in common, you're two different people having two different experiences. And just as we want to feel seen and heard and respected and understood, we have to do the same thing with our partner. Validate both opinions, validate both perspectives, and then work to brainstorm, compromise, and negotiate to find out what is best for the two of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is definitely key to all these things. What happens in a relationship when, the love part, you're still in love with your partner, and but you don't really, the intimacy part is gone on the side of one of the partners. What happens then, and how do you negotiate through that?
Absolutely. So we first have to change our mindset. Again, we're very ignorant when it comes to creating successful relationships. So there's a lot of myths out there, and I'm here to try to bust some of those myths. And one of them is that when you're in a relationship, especially if you're married, the sex goes out of the window after a certain period of time. The relationship gets very repetitive and it gets boring. You get comfortable, and this is just how it's going to be. And you become more like roommates or friends, and there's nothing you can really do about it. It's just what happens. Well, it happens because we don't have the tools and techniques, but it doesn't mean it has to happen. So when intimacy goes out of the window, we have to ask ourselves, is this a problem or is this an opportunity? So if we see it as an opportunity, we can create something totally different. We can create something fresh. It's like we have a blank slate and we can start over. So the first thing we want to ask ourselves is, what is intimacy? So a lot of times people think intimacy is the same as sex, right? They think, oh, intimacy equals sex. Well, it actually doesn't, because there's different types of intimacy. We have emotional, physical, spiritual, sexual, and intellectual intimacy. So intimacy just means the bond that you have with your partner. It's the connection that you have. And a lot of times when the sexual intimacy goes out of the window, there's also signs that the emotional, the physical, intellectual intimacy has also gone out. So when we're, going about our day and we're very busy and there's a lot going on and we're just like, oh, I'm just not in the mood. Are you also not in the mood for physical intimacy or emotional intimacy? Is there any fighting in the relationship that kind of, allows you to push back and say, I'm not in the mood because, we just had a fight last week and now I see you like this and I feel that emotional distance. And then, when we're talking about sexual intimacy by itself, we really have to ask ourselves, is there any learning that can be put in place? Is there any growth that can be put in place? A lot of us are very ignorant when it comes to sex. I was for so many years, because I was listening to friends and family members and, seeing what I saw on TV and sort of this idea of what sex was in society. And I realized I had such a limited view and a limited idea of what sex actually was. A lot of times, women especially, we suffer from this orgasm gap. In heterosexual relationships, heterosexual men have far more orgasms than heterosexual women. If this is happening in your relationship, is there a space for growth and for learning so that you can try to bridge this gap and understand why it does exist, maybe not only in your relationship, but in society in general? If there is communication blocks in your relationship when it comes to sex, you feel you can't express what you don't like, what you do like, what you want, is there space there to work on the communication so that the two of you can start to explore and experiment? Is there anything that you want to change up, you want to learn, you want to practice that maybe you haven't done before? Because sex can be very repetitive. A lot of times, when we're talking about heterosexual couples, a lot of times the woman will stop wanting to have sex before the man. But a lot of people say, oh, because women don't enjoy sex. Absolutely not true. Women enjoy sex just as much as men. But what's happening a lot of times is that we get bored much more quickly, and we're not stimulated in the way that we need to be stimulated to reach orgasm or to have a fully, pleasurable experience. For example, the average sex session lasts between 7 and 13 minutes. The average woman needs about 20 to 30 minutes to get fully aroused. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the sex is over before she's even ready. So there's a lot of things that we can learn, and there's so much growth that can happen if we get to a place where we say, the sex isn't happening as much as it used to or as much as I would like. What is it there that we can learn? What can we invest in? What tools and techniques can we put into practice? We have this idea of low libido. People say, oh, I have low libido and my partner has low libido. Most of the time, it has nothing to do with biology. It's not that one partner is old or broken or, something's wrong with them. Libido has so many different factors. We're talking about, the destruction of the relationship. Again, if we just had a fight, I'm not in the mood. right? When it comes to stress, 80% of men report using sex as a way to decrease stress. Only 20% of women do. That means that men look to their female partners to relax, to alleviate that stress. When women are stressed most of the time, we can have sex because we can't focus, because we're thinking about all the things that we need to do to relieve that stress. So when we understand and when we're educated, many opportunities come up, and we can say, you know what, this is what we have right now as a problem, but that problem is an opportunity to grow. When we identify problems in our relationship, it's called relationship awareness. It's one of the 4 pillars of relationship intelligence. We're able to realize there's something there that's not where I would like it to be. How can we now respond to that and work together to make our relationship stronger?
I think a lot of sexual intimacy also has to do with the other facets of intimacy. So if you're not getting the intimacy, as far as conversation or, just those little touches that, that women mainly like, the flowers and the good conversation and, oh, geez, you look nice, even if she looks like shit, it's just
Absolutely.
those little compliments and things that brings about the sexual intimacy, because the woman's feeling good about herself.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing really that a lot of people get confused is about desire. We think that in a relationship, we're going to have this desire, which we call spontaneous desire. I'm vacuuming, I'm grocery shopping, and poof, all of a sudden I want to have sex. This desire usually comes in the beginning of a relationship because everything is new and fresh, and it's very attractive because we're curious creatures. But if you are in a long-term relationship, what we need to invest in more is reactive or responsive desire. This is the desire that we have to have sex because we're reacting and responding to stimuli, mental stimuli, getting those flowers or those compliments, touching each other. Having that physical intimacy of hand holding, cuddling, caressing, tickling, massaging, whatever it is. Are you stimulating your partner in all these different ways to build that desire so that it just, she can't help it. She just wants to have sex because there's so much stimulation. Another thing is, are you broadening your perspective of what sexual intimacy is? Because a lot of times we think sexual intimacy, sex is sort of, we have a little bit of foreplay and then we have penetration and then, one or both of us has an orgasm and then we go to bed. Well, you do that enough times, I don't want it anymore, right? I'm bored, I'm done. But if we expand our mind as to what sex can be, it doesn't have to include penetration. It doesn't have to include anything. It can be as simple as, sucking an elbow or nibbling a neck. You can call that sex. So once you relax and you say, sex is just that energy, it's that connection, it's that stimulation, and you have that more throughout the day, right? Because we're so busy, it's like, oh, I don't have time for sex, or I'm too tired, or this and that, because we're thinking that sex has to equal this one tiny thing in this box. No, sex can be 5 minutes of stimulation here, 10 minutes of a little, tickling and nibbling there. It can be, sexting and sending cute notes and stuff. It can be, reading erotica to each other. When we expand what that definition is, we're going to feel more at ease to play with the idea of sex. Again, sexual intimacy, it's about pleasure. It's not a performance piece. It's not, a favor we do for our partner or a duty that we have to perform. It's an intimate, pleasurable experience between two people who love each other.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And a lot of relationships fall down because they don't understand that dynamic, that sex isn't about the little box, the little penetration, the task at hand. It's to do with other things as well. And a lot of men, well, I'm going to put men in the box and say that they don't understand it because of the way they've been educated. And women don't understand it because the way they've been educated. They expect this great, orgasm to happen every time. And when they don't have one, they think, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Or he's not doing it right. And he's probably doing all the right things, but it's not there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had so many people come to me and ask me, why am I not having an orgasm through penetration? Is there something wrong with me? And I say most women don't. They need that clitoral stimulation. They need other types of stimulation. So again, it's just about the education. And when we look at movies, I love movies, I love the theatrics, but they are not, I say that they should have a warning label like they have on the cigarettes. Like, this is not real life. In the movies, they're kissing, usually quite, aggressively. And then all of a sudden he's on top of her. And 2 seconds later, she's having an orgasm. This is not what's happening in the households. So we really need to understand our bodies, allow that time for self pleasure as well to figure out what feels good to you, and having that communication with your partner, creating that safe space for exploration, communication. A lot of times when we're having difficulties, when it comes to orgasm, it can come from shame. It could come from, repetitive ideas that you tell yourself, the mindset and all of those things. So if you find yourself in that place, creating that safe space with your partner is really, really important, because you can go through the process that you have to go through. And then just, acceptance and appreciation for your partner showing up for you, patience for you too as a couple. There's a lot of different practices that we can use to increase our sexual experience and our relationship overall.
Absolutely. And I think it begins, I don't know, if they still have sex education in schools, I think that these things, not practice, but need to be explained to both sexes, so that they don't have false expectations.
We really, really, really need this kind of education. We need the education of relationships. We need the education of sex. And sex education is not just, be careful or you're going to have an STD. This is how you use a condom, use birth control, the end. I remember my sex ed class, I think we took it just for 6 months, and it was mostly just about STDs, and they showed the videos
and menstruation
on the rolling screen, right? And putting a condom on a banana. And it was just, yeah, some of those things are practical, but what about boundaries? What about expressing to your partner what it is that you like? What about, communication and the difference between sex and sexual intimacy? These things are not taught by our parents, because our parents lived in a very different time. Relationships have changed more in the last 50 years than they have in the last 5,000. We now have relationships where we can be whoever we want to be. We can be with whoever we want to be with. And that dynamic of back and forth has never really happened like it has today. As you said, your partner's family, their parents were like, okay, the woman has to do what she's told. And that's an actually easy relationship in the sense of complexity. Relationship complexity used to be very, very low. When we have one person dictating everything and one person who's sort of the boss, that's an easy relationship dynamic, because I don't have to compromise. I don't have to negotiate. We don't even really have to communicate, right? We can just talk about like funny stuff, but we don't have to have serious conversations, because what I say goes. But when you have two people in the relationship and we're trying to figure out how to make two people happy, how to make two people feel seen and heard and appreciated and respected and valued, and give those two people in the relationship the best possible life experience possible, that means the relationship complexity is high. But if we learn how to navigate it, we're going to have, such an incredible experience, because we get to be ourselves. We get to have the life that we want to live. We get to enjoy the whole point of partnership in 2022.
Yeah. And I think, especially for kids that didn't have good parenting role models, as far as, marriage and partnering and love and all that sort of thing, it's really difficult to know what they are meant to be doing when it comes to relationships, because they've not seen or heard or experienced anything like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of us are reliving that childhood trauma. I myself, I was abandoned by my father at birth. left to sleep in the snow. My mother and my stepfather were very abusive and very neglectful. That was sort of my introduction to relationships. And it was, the most horrid thing that you can imagine. And so I picked up on those things. I thought that when you're upset with someone, you get to scream at them as loud as you want. I thought that, hitting and throwing things was just a normal part of the human experience. I didn't know any better because I had never seen a high functional relationship before. I didn't see what it was like to show someone you appreciate them. My communication skills were horrid. Even now, I really have to remind myself to be the listener, because in conversation, the listener is the harder of the two jobs. And even now, as an expert, I have to remind myself, okay, just listen, right? But back when I was in college, I literally didn't have the capacity to listen. I could hear you, but I wasn't listening to anything you're saying because I'm thinking about what I want to say next. I'm defending myself. I'm proving you wrong. That was my personal role as the listener, because those were all the things that I picked up. My mother, definitely not my father because he wasn't there. They never showed me, either by example or by teaching me. And so a lot of times when we come from these sort of bad, traumatic backgrounds, we don't learn from watching. But also, even if we come from a good background, let's say that our parents loved each other and they loved us, and there was a beautiful family dynamic, sometimes that's not enough either. Because I sort of say the example of you can watch Messi play football, right? You can watch him, you can study him, you can say, wow, he's such an amazing football player. That doesn't mean that you're going to be any good at playing football, right? So watching and learning and practicing are two different things. So sometimes we do see people that had beautiful home lives, childhoods, who still struggle with their relationships today.
Yeah, that sort of surprises me a little bit. I just thought it would be normal if you came from a loving home. You would know how to be in a loving relationship. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I was misguided. Because I too came from a very abusive background, and first sexual experience was I was raped by my father. So for me, sex growing up was not a very nice experience. So it took me a long time to be able to enjoy that. It was a long time. And so I can relate to, your story about, fighting and thinking that you're a good listener, but you're not really, because you have to say something and your brain's thinking all the time.
Absolutely. And when we go through trauma, it's really important to learn how to be in a relationship regardless of what it is that you've gone through. My husband, for example, he had a more or less sort of normal childhood, happy childhood, and I didn't. And so when you are in that dynamic of one person or both people coming from a sort of traumatic background, learning how to navigate that is really important. I think more important than, let's say, if they both come from a happy background, because you have to have that balance. You have to have the balance of, the person who comes from trauma really having that space for healing if they haven't fully healed from it, having that space for communication, if they have any kind of triggers, if they have anything that they need, extra to take care of themselves, to look after themselves in the partnership. But you also need the partner who hasn't gone through that, for them to be able to show compassion and understanding. Sometimes my husband thinks, and he thinks out loud. We have this very, very big safe space. So we both think out loud. And he'll say to me, but that doesn't bother me. And I'm like, yeah, but it bothers me because we're different. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, right. Right. So learning that, people are different. They respond to things differently. We have I say that I'm healed from my trauma. It took me many years, but I'm in a safe space where I feel very disconnected from what happened to me. When I talk about it, it's almost like telling you a movie that I saw, because I've come to accept it, I've come to forgive it, and I've come to see the beauty of who I've become through it. But I do believe that trauma will always leave scars. And so just like, I have a scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike, I'm no longer traumatized from falling off my bike, but that scar will always be there. And so I do still have within me some triggers, some things that, upset me that may not upset other people. And so he's fully aware of those things and he accommodates them. He's very compassionate and understanding that, oh, this doesn't bother me, but actually it does bother my wife because of those things. And that's okay. And that's perfectly fine. So being in a relationship with one person or two people who have gone through trauma, really understanding what that looks like and that you can have a fully functional, high functional, beautiful relationship regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally agree that we ended up having a really beautiful marriage for a very, very long time. And so I'm very grateful that we both grew up.
Yes. Yes.
Railey, I'd love to discuss with you a little bit more. You've got an offering that you want to share with our audience today.
Yes. So this is the I believe that I gave you the ultimate guide to a thriving relationship. Yes. Okay. Because I have lots of different offers. Yes. So the ultimate guide to a thriving relationship is sort of like a mini Power Couple PhD. It's a 6-video series where I go through the steps that you can take to create a thriving relationship from scratch. So it's sort of giving you the education to understand what is that formula, what is that foundation, and what are the steps, step by step, to create that thriving relationship. It's a video of me just speaking and explaining to you. It also comes with a workbook so that you can start to practice and write down those things and start to create that relationship. Whether you have a relationship that's rocky or whether you want to learn, even if you have a great relationship, you can still learn a lot of different tools. You always want to be learning more and more and more as you go along because it's a life experience. So again, it's a 6-video series where I will teach you exactly how to create a thriving relationship from scratch.
Wonderful. And thank you. I thank you for giving that to our viewers and to our listeners. I'm sure that a lot of people will take advantage of that. Railey, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or to work with you?
Yes. So you can always go to RaileyMolinario.com. I am on Instagram for those of you who want to follow me. I do a lot of lives and give a lot of tips and ideas on Instagram. And I'm also on Facebook. So everything is just Railey Molinario. Pretty simple
Perfect.
To find me. Yeah.
Perfect, Railey. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Have you got any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes, I would say, especially because this is a platform about trauma and healing, I think the most important thing is to understand that we all deserve love and we all deserve happiness, regardless of what you've gone through, regardless of how you responded to what you've gone through. I struggled for a long time forgiving myself because when I came out of my trauma, I was maybe not the greatest person in the world. And it was hard for me to forgive myself and believe that even though I wasn't loved as a child, it didn't mean that I was unlovable. And so really understanding deep in your bones that you deserve to be loved, you deserve happiness, you deserve to have that thriving relationship. If you don't have any of those things now, it's just about learning those tools and techniques, but you absolutely deserve it.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think we all need to remember that we are lovable. It doesn't matter what's happened to us, as long as we can forgive ourselves, even if we have nothing to forgive, but forgive ourselves anyway. And we are all worthy, as you say, of love, and we are all lovable in our own little ways. And we just have to dig deep and find it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Railey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.